Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I used to think I understood emergencies because I worked security. That sounds stupid now, but before everything came apart, I believed routine was protection. I worked nights at a warehouse complex southeast of Colorado Springs, out past the denser parts of town where the land opens up and everything starts to look like loading docks, chain-link fences, storage yards, and long frontage roads. My job was mostly access control, camera checks, badge logs, and walking the perimeter in weather nobody else wanted to be outside in. I knew how to stay alert, how to read people when they were angry, and how to keep my voice level when someone tried to make me panic. None of that prepared me for the first 48 hours. My name is Riley Maddox. I was 29, living in a cheap apartment complex off South Academy with thin walls, broken laundry machines, and a parking lot that always smelled like hot brakes in summer. I had a decent flashlight, work boots, a small lock blade, and one handgun I kept legal and locked because my father drilled that into me. I also had the kind of life that depends on systems continuing to function. Badge in, badge out, gas station coffee, direct deposit, rent due, repeat. The first thing that changed was noise. Not one big event. Layers. Sirens, then more sirens, then a kind of constant citywide agitation that never really settled. Helicopters, cars accelerating too hard, people shouting in parking lots. My phone blowing up with messages from coworkers, then family, then people I had not talked to in years, forwarding videos and rumors and clips with no dates. Stay home. Don't go to hospitals. Military is moving. They're saying it's riots. They're saying it's some kind of infection. This is fake. This is not fake. At the warehouse, we started getting no-shows on day one. By that evening, 2 drivers came in arguing over road closures on Interstate 25 and Highway 24. One of them said a fuel tanker had jackknifed near Monument. Another said there were crowds at big box stores on Powers. My supervisor, Dan Mercer, kept repeating the same line. We stay on post until corporate says otherwise. Corporate never said anything useful. Cameras started catching people cutting across the back lot. Not employees, just random people moving fast and looking behind them. One of our loading contractors called dispatch from a truck and said he passed a wreck near Fountain where people were not helping the injured because they were afraid to get close. He was shaking so badly on speakerphone I could hear his teeth clicking. Dan told him to get to the facility. He never made it. The second night, our remote feeds started failing one by one. Not all at once. First east fence line, then gate 3, then the rear container yard. We still had local power, but the network dropped and came back in bursts. Every time it came back, the messages and videos got worse. I went home after a double shift because Dan said we were rotating and I needed sleep. I made it to my apartment at around 7:10 a.m. People were already dragging furniture into the breezeways. Someone had zip-tied a handwritten sign to the mailboxes that said, "Do not open for anyone." A guy from the second floor I barely knew was carrying a baseball bat and yelling at somebody on speakerphone. I locked my door, filled everything I owned that could hold water, and tried to sleep in my clothes. I woke up to pounding. Not on my door, somewhere down the hall. Then glass breaking, then shouting. Then the kind of scream that makes every hair on your neck rise before your brain decides what it means. I grabbed my pistol, flashlight, backpack, and keys. I remember standing in my kitchen in total silence for maybe 5 seconds, listening to my refrigerator hum while people outside lost control of themselves. I had this very clean thought. If I go into the hallway now, I'm choosing whatever happens next. I looked through the peephole and saw 3 people struggling at the far end by the stairwell. I could not tell who was helping who. Somebody slipped, Somebody else went down. There was no clear line to get out through the parking lot because more people were running between cars and some were moving wrong, unsteady but fast once they locked onto someone. I did not use the front door. Our ground floor unit had a window facing a strip of dry landscaping and a concrete retention swale that ran behind the property. I cut the screen, kicked out enough glass to clear the frame, pushed my pack through, and crawled out with my boots landing in wet gravel and old cigarette butts. I sliced my forearm on the lower frame and wrapped it with a t-shirt from my bag before I even stood up. I could hear shouting from the lot, but nobody saw me. That drainage swale is why I'm alive. South and east of a lot of apartment and retail developments around Colorado Springs, especially near the spread of newer construction and older utility corridors, you get these concrete-lined channels, culverts, and erosion ditches that look useless until they become the only path not jammed with cars. I dropped into the swale, kept low, and moved along the line where concrete met dirt so I would not silhouette myself on the open sections. I had no plan beyond away. Away from academy, away from crowds, away from roads where everyone else would go and where every wreck would block 10 more people. I followed the ditch south until it connected into a wider drainage line with scrub, broken fencing, and service access routes. I crossed under a road through a culvert that smelled like mud and fuel, then came out near a strip of light industrial lots where roll-up doors were half open and no one looked in charge of anything. By late afternoon, I had moved farther than I thought possible on foot in a city I'd driven for years. My phone service was there and gone. The battery dropped from 80 to 30% because I kept checking maps, messages, and local alerts. Most alerts were vague. Shelter in place. Avoid affected areas. Emergency response delayed. One county notice told people not to call 911 for non-life-threatening issues because lines were overwhelmed. Another warning mentioned aggressive behavior associated with acute illness and avoid direct contact. That phrase stuck with me. Acute illness. Like we were still pretending the problem fit inside ordinary words. I slept the first night behind a concrete sound wall near a maintenance yard with my backpack under my head and my pistol in both hands inside my jacket. I did not really sleep. Every noise turned into a person in my mind. Every engine in the distance sounded like it was coming toward me. Around dawn, I moved again. The second day was worse because the city had shifted. It was not just panic anymore. It was empty zones, then sudden pockets of movement. Intersections blocked by abandoned vehicles. Storefront glass shattered. People carrying too much. People traveling in groups and not making eye contact. I stayed off major roads and used drainage lines, utility easements, and the backsides of commercial lots. I was heading generally west and a little south without meaning to, because the terrain and barriers kept funneling me. When I could orient myself, I could see the Front Range and know where I was relative to Colorado Springs, but I was not trying to reach a landmark. I was trying not to get trapped. By late on the second evening, I was exhausted enough to make mistakes. I cut through an older utility corridor with scrub oak, rabbit brush, and broken concrete barriers probably left from some long-finished work project. The ground rose toward a low berm. Beyond it, I expected either more drainage infrastructure or a fence line. Instead, I found poured concrete, weathered and half-hidden, and a scatter of Jersey barriers set in a way that did not look random at all. At first, I thought it was a decommissioned utility vault or some old municipal structure. Then I saw the door. It was tucked into the slope, partly shielded by the berm and brush, with a steel face and a recessed frame set into reinforced concrete. Not the giant round movie-style vault door people imagine. This was smaller, rectangular, built for use not drama. Heavy steel, industrial hinges, protected hardware, faded stenciling almost gone under dust and age. The kind of thing you do not notice unless you are almost on top of it. I froze and listened. No voices, no vehicles. Just wind moving dry grass and the distant, inconsistent sounds of a city under stress. There was a chain through the outer handle and a padlock, but the chain had too much slack, like someone had secured it in a hurry or after the fact without understanding how the latch assembly seated. I tugged once and felt the door shift a fraction against the frame. Not open. Just enough to tell me the lock was not what mattered most here. I should say this clearly. I did not break into a hardened military site with action movie skills. I got lucky and I was too tired to walk away. I circled the berm first. There were concrete blocks, scrub, and what looked like old conduit runs entering the ground nearby. I found a rusted service box half buried under debris. Empty. No help. I came back to the door and studied the latch area with my flashlight held low under my jacket so the beam would not carry. The outer hardware had been modified sometime in the past, maybe for secondary security when the site was mothballed or repurposed. The padlock held the chain, but the chain was looped around a guard bracket instead of the actual throw handle path. Whoever had locked it either got interrupted or assumed nobody would test it. I unhooked the chain. The padlock stayed closed. I nearly laughed from the stupidness of it, but I was too tense. The door still would not open. It was heavy and sealed tight. I leaned into the handle and felt movement, then resistance from inside pressure or a second latch. I let go and checked the frame. There was a narrow secondary access panel set low, maybe for maintenance. The screws were old, and one had backed out enough to leave a gap. I worked my knife blade into the seam, bent the panel lip, and got enough space to see a linkage rod. I had no manual, no training, no idea what exact mechanism I was looking at. I just knew industrial latches use rods, cams, and stops. I nudged one piece while pulling the handle and heard a deep internal clunk. The door moved inward half an inch. Cold air hit my face, stale and metallic. I stood there in the dark with my hand on the edge, suddenly sure I was about to walk into something worse than what was outside. But behind me was open ground, night coming on, and a city I no longer trusted to have any safe corners left. I pulled the door wider and slipped inside. The entry corridor was short and angled, probably for blast baffling. Concrete walls, painted at some point in pale gray-green. Dust on the floor, but not untouched dust. There were old boot marks, maybe years old, maybe months. Another inner door stood open on hydraulic closers that had long since lost pressure. Beyond it was a room lit by emergency strips running dim on backup power. That light is the part I still think about. Dim, flickering in one corner, but on. Not a ruin, not dead, sleeping. I shut the outer door as quietly as I could and stood there breathing through my mouth, listening for motion. I smelled old concrete, machine oil, insulation, paper, and the dry, canned air smell of enclosed places that have not had full ventilation in a while. The first room was a ready area or equipment vestibule. Metal shelving. Empty mounts on one wall where tools or protective gear used to hang. A bench, a dented locker with no door. Faded labels in block print. Some were military-style abbreviations, some plain English. Water shutoff. Vent isolation. Fire suppression. Electrical distribution. I found the main corridor and realized this was not a giant bunker. It was compact. Maybe a small support shelter or hardened operations outpost, not built for a platoon to live in long-term without resupply. That mattered, though I did not understand how much yet. There were 6 main spaces I could access immediately. The entry vestibule, a control room, a bunk room with 4 rack frames, a galley/storage room, a mechanical room, and a washroom with a stainless sink, toilet, and a shower stall with the water tagged out of service in old marker. 3 more doors were locked with internal key cylinders and a hasp arrangement that suggested administrative lockout, not just privacy. One had a yellow placard, "Battery room / authorized personnel only." Another read comms. The third had no visible label, only a painted number. I found the first miracle in the galley. Water. Not flowing taps. The line pressure was dead. But against the wall, tied into a utility manifold, sat 2 cylindrical storage tanks with sight gauges. One read near empty. The other sat around 1/3. The labels indicated potable reserve, and the date on the inspection sticker was old enough to make me distrust every drop. Still, sealed water in a sheltered environment was better than any ditch runoff. I found the second miracle in the storage racks. Food, but not much. Cases of military-style rations, some way past inspection dates but still sealed, plus crackers, electrolyte powder, and a few cans with no labels I did not touch until I had to. There were also water purification tablets, spare filters, bleach concentrate in a locked caddy, and maintenance manuals thicker than any novel I had ever finished. I found the third miracle in the control room. Power, sort of. A small indicator panel showed incoming utility status dead, backup generator offline, and battery reserve active on essential circuits only. The batteries were somewhere behind the locked battery room door. Essential circuits were keeping emergency lights, some sensors, and a control logic panel alive. Most switches did nothing when I tried them. One red indicator did. Alarm/fault. Blinking steadily. Not a siren, no audible tone, just a red rectangle on the panel, blinking every second and pulling my eyes to it until I hated it. Under it were labels for multiple subsystems: vent differential, hatch seal, sump level, CO sensor fault, battery temperature, line pressure, intrusion loop, and remote link. No obvious one was lit because half the label strips had faded and the tiny legends were hidden behind cloudy plastic. I could not tell what the blinking meant. A general fault, maybe, a latched alarm waiting for acknowledgement. A real hazard. A dead sensor. I did not know, and that ignorance sat in my chest like a weight. There was a clipboard wired to the wall with laminated, quick procedures, written for trained personnel, and absolutely not for a warehouse guard who had arrived covered in dust and dried sweat. The first line on the sheet read, "In event of unscheduled occupancy, establish air, water, power status before full habitation." Unscheduled occupancy. That was me, apparently. I laughed once, quietly, because if I did not laugh I might start shouting. I spent the first night inside doing 3 things: checking every accessible room for hazards, moving a locker to brace the inner entry door, and drinking too much water too fast because I was so relieved not to be outside. I made myself stop after I read the tank gauges again and did the math in my head. If one tank was basically dead and the other maybe a third full, I could not treat it like normal life. Even if it held 40 or 50 gallons, that was not long if I wasted it. I ate half a ration pouch and sat on the floor of the control room, staring at the blinking alarm until I fell asleep against the wall. When I woke up, the red light was still blinking. Day 3, or what I called Day 3 because I had lost clean time tracking, was the day the bunker started teaching me that shelter and safety are not the same thing. I found a logbook in the control room desk, dry and intact. Most entries were years old. Periodic inspections, filter replacements, battery checks, generator test notes. The site appeared to have been maintained intermittently even after whatever its main mission had been. The writing changed hands often, some military, some civilian contractors by the look of it. There were references to Fort Carson support schedules, county utility coordination, and one note about temporary standby status due to budget decisions. I did not know what branch or unit originally owned it. I still do not, and I am not going to pretend I decoded every abbreviation. What mattered was the pattern. This place had systems, and the systems had rules. Rule 1. Air first. The mechanical room contained the ventilation units, filter housings, duct dampers, and a tangle of labeled piping. I recognized enough to be careful. There were hand wheels for manual dampers, pressure gauges that may or may not have been accurate, and a filter bank with differential pressure markings. The quick guide in the control room plus a full manual let me confirm the essential fact. With utility power down and generator offline, the ventilation was not fully running. Some passive circulation existed, and the bunker was not airtight in the dramatic sense because seals and penetrations age, but if I occupied it long-term without managing air, humidity, and contaminants, I could make myself sick in a sealed concrete box. Rule 2. Power determines everything. The alarm panel blinking was tied into low-power control, but the generator starter sequence failed when I tried the obvious switch. Manual said verify fuel, coolant, battery, breaker positions, and interlocks. The generator sat in a sound-insulated alcove behind a steel mesh partition, a compact diesel set big enough to run this facility but not a huge installation. The fuel tank gauge read above 0, but that could mean stale fuel and lies. The starter battery voltage was low. I could not access the main battery room to check the reserve bank because that door remained locked. Rule 3. Water is a schedule, not a convenience. The potable reserve manifold had a hand pump and isolation valves. The sink could be fed if I lined up the valves correctly, but pressure was weak and inconsistent. I used a steel cup and measured what I drank. I set my own rationing on paper: drinking, minimal hygiene, no shower, no flushing unless necessary. I hated doing that on day 1 in shelter, but I had no idea when I would find more. Rule 4. Ignore a blinking alarm and it becomes the only thing you can think about. By afternoon, I was angry enough to start systematically tracing the alarm panel. I found the acknowledge button. It changed the blink pattern, then returned. Fault still active. Good. At least the panel was alive enough to register my input. I found a legend sheet folded behind the panel cover and matched the blink code count after reset to remote link/supervisory fault and possibly intrusion loop open. Depending on switch bank position, I could not fully sit still. That was both better and worse. Better because it did not scream gas leak or fire. Worse because intrusion loop in a bunker with a hidden door suggests sensors on access points, and remote link suggests somebody, somewhere, was supposed to know this site had been opened. I sat there staring at that panel and realized I might have announced myself to a system I could not contact and could not shut up. I stopped trying to be comfortable after that. I started trying to be useful to myself. I inventoried everything accessible: tools, hardware, consumables, paper maps, old first aid supplies, spare bulbs, cleaning chemicals, duct tape, wire, fuses, 1 multimeter with a weak battery, and 2 key rings in an empty drawer that fit none of the locked doors. I checked the bunks and found blankets vacuum-sealed in plastic sleeves, still usable. I checked the washroom medicine cabinet and found aspirin, antacids, adhesive bandages, and expired antibiotic ointment. I checked the galley and found a hand-crank can opener, which made me trust the place a little more because at least somebody once planned for power loss. That night, I heard movement above me for the first time. Not voices. Just weight, faint through concrete and dirt, maybe an animal. Maybe debris shifting in the wind. Maybe people moving around the berm and barriers and not seeing the door. I killed my flashlight, sat still in the dark control room, and listened until my calves cramped. No one tried the door. Day 4, I decided I was either going to understand the generator or die listening to that alarm blink. The manual for the generator was specific enough to help and old enough to fight me. Diesel fuel degrades. Water contamination, microbial growth, varnish, clogged filters, weak batteries, seized linkages, all the usual problems. I checked the day tank and sediment bowl, cloudy, not great. I found spare filters and a fuel additive bottle in storage with a date I ignored because there was no better option. I bled the line as best I could using the manual and labels. I cleaned contacts on the starter battery and scavenged a charger lead from a maintenance kit, then spent an hour rigging a low-current charge path from Hassan accessible service outlet circuit that was still live on the essential battery bus. It was a bad solution, but I monitored voltage and did not leave it unattended. When I finally tried a manual crank sequence and starter engagement, the engine coughed, spun, and failed. The second attempt gave me smoke and a harder cough. The third attempt caught for 5 seconds, shook like it wanted to tear off the mounts, then died. I sat on the floor grinning like an idiot because that meant it could run. It took the rest of the day. Fuel, bleed again. Another check of air intake. A stuck shutdown linkage I only found because the manual had a troubleshooting line that matched the symptom exactly. The fourth serious attempt roared to life so loudly in the enclosed room that I stumbled back and slapped my hearing protection on too late. The voltmeter climbed. The panel in the control room changed status. Emergency lights brightened. Vent fans spun up in stages with a metallic groan and then a steady push of air through the ducts that made the entire bunker feel suddenly inhabited. I nearly cried from relief. Then the alarm started blinking faster. More systems online meant more faults visible. The panel now showed a clear-latched fault for ComLink fail and a separate line for EXT param loop open. I had no way to repair either from inside, but I had answers, and answers reduce panic. I ran the generator for 2 hours under light load while monitoring temperature, oil pressure, and exhaust notes like I had any business doing that. Then I shut it down to conserve fuel, and because I did not trust a neglected machine to become my best friend overnight, I wrote everything down in the logbook in my own handwriting. Date unknown, occupant Riley Maddox. Generator started manually. Runtime approximately 2 hours. Vent operational, water reserves limited. Perimeter/intrusion fault active. ComLink failed. Writing my name in that official log felt strange, like signing into a place not meant to remember me. By day 5, the bunker started to feel less like luck and more like a trap with benefits. That is the part people do not understand when they fantasize about hidden shelters. The walls are solid. The door is heavy. You can sleep without hearing every distant sound. But every comfort depends on finite systems, and every system turns your mind into a calculator. How much fuel is left if I run the generator 1 hour in the morning and 1 at night? How much water if I cut washing entirely? How long before rations become a problem? What if the ventilation seals fail? What if someone outside sees exhaust or hears the engine? What if the blinking alarm really is broadcasting my position to anyone with the right map and receiver? I found old paper maps in the control room cabinet, including local utility overlays and a military-style area reference map that covered parts of the Colorado Springs region. Some coordinates and grid references were blacked out, but enough remained to suggest the site was tied to a broader network once. Not a huge strategic bunker, more like a hardened support node or contingency shelter. Something personnel were supposed to know existed, and most other people were not. There was also a binder on emergency occupancy procedures. It assumed a team, not one person. Roles for site lead, mechanical, communications, and security. Checklists for perimeter verification requiring outside inspection in pairs. Water replenishment procedures tied to tanker support. Medical isolation protocols. Rotating watch schedules. Reading that alone at a metal table with ration crackers in my hand made me feel more isolated than sleeping outside had. On day 6, I considered leaving. I opened the inner door, moved the locker, and stood in the entry corridor for a long time with my pack on, pistol holstered, listening through the outer seal. I had food and some water and intermittent power in here. Outside, I had mobility, maybe more chance to find people, maybe more chance to die in a ditch. Inside, at least, I understood the risks a little better. Then I heard something from the control room. Tick. Not the blinking alarm. A relay or switch clicking in a different rhythm. I went back and saw a line indicator I had ignored before pulse weakly under the comm panel. Inbound attempt. It flashed and died. Then again, 10 minutes later. Some old system somewhere was pinging or handshaking or trying to reconnect on a dead network. I had no training on that console, but I could read labels. There was a protected switch for manual link isolate under a guard cover. I stared at it a long time, then left it alone. If this place still had any chance of being known to legitimate personnel, I did not want to sever it because I was scared of a blinking light. That same day, I finally got into the comms room by accident and stubbornness, which seems to be the story of my life. The key cylinder would not turn with anything I had, but the door frame on the latch side had settled enough that when the generator was running and the ventilation changed pressure, the latch alignment shifted. I noticed the door flex on startup. I shut the generator down, wedged the frame slightly with a thin pry bar from the toolkit, then restarted. With the frame under tension, the latch tongue retracted just enough when I worked the handle hard. It was ugly and probably not how the site manager would approve, but it opened. Inside were racks for radios and switching equipment, most powered down or removed. A field telephone handset, cokes and patch panels. One hardened terminal dark and dead. A narrow desk with laminated frequency plans and contact trees so outdated they were almost history. But there was one useful thing. A portable VHF transceiver and a charging cradle, plus spare battery packs. I am not a radio operator. I know enough from security work and listening to hobby guys to avoid pressing buttons I do not understand. The battery packs were dead, and the charger only worked when the generator ran, but that was something. I added Learn Radio to my list of jobs because apparently I had become the entire staffing chart. By the end of day 7, I had a routine. Wake in the bunk room after too little sleep. Listen for outside movement before doing anything noisy. Run generator for 1 hour if conditions seemed safe. Charge radio batteries, phone, while it still mattered, flashlight cells and the multimeter battery. Cycle ventilation. Check water gauges. Record numbers. Eat small, read manuals. Try one maintenance task. Rest, listen, repeat. It was during the second generator run that I heard the voices. At first, I thought it was the radio. Faint, human, irregular. I grabbed the handset and realized the sound was coming from the entry corridor, carried through steel and concrete by the outer door. Voices above the door. I killed the generator immediately. The sudden silence made the bunker feel like it had inhaled and stopped. There were at least 2 people outside, maybe 3. I could not make out every word through the sealed door and berm, but I caught enough. Here, I'm telling you. Concrete under this brush. Check behind the barriers. Then metal scraping. Somebody moving chain or testing the handle. My hands started shaking so badly I had to set the radio down. I moved to the control room and cut every light I could without losing the panel entirely. I stood in the dark with my pistol in my right hand and a flashlight in my left, pointed at the floor. The outer handle thumped once, then twice. Not random banging, testing. Then a voice, clearer this time, close to the door. "Anyone in there?" I did not answer. The voice came again, male, maybe 40s, controlled but strained. "If anybody's in there, we're not looking for trouble. We saw the track in the wash and figured someone came this way." Track in the wash, my boot prints. Maybe from days ago, preserved in dry mud and dust. I had been careful and not careful enough. Another voice, younger, said, "Tell them we have water containers." The first voice snapped back low, quiet. That told me a lot in 2 seconds. They were negotiating already, assuming whoever was inside had something worth trading for. Maybe that meant normal people. Maybe it meant people who had learned fast. I stayed silent. The handle moved again. Then a pause. Then a new sound that made my stomach drop. Tapping on the steel near the latch, deliberate. Like someone tracing the door's hardware layout with a tool. They were checking how it locked. I backed into the control room and looked at the blinking perimeter fault. For the first time, I understood the bunker's real question. The thick door, the manuals, the rationing, the systems. None of that answered the main problem. The main problem was what happens when shelter becomes a known point and people arrive with needs. If I answered, maybe they were decent, and I gained allies and more hands to keep this place running. If I answered, maybe they rushed the door the first time I cracked it. If I stayed silent, maybe they left. Or maybe they came back prepared. The older voice called again. Listen, we're 3. 1 woman, 1 kid, 1 adult male. We're not armed heavy, we just need to talk. Kid. I hate that this worked on me. Maybe it was true, maybe not. But the word cut through all my tactical thinking and went straight to conscience. I still did not answer. I moved to the entry vestibule and listened from behind the inner door. The outer steel carried vibration better there. I could hear whispering, shifting feet, and once the scrape of a barrier being dragged slightly. Then a different voice, female, closer than before. If you can hear me, we're leaving this here. Something small hit the door and clinked on concrete. We're coming back before dark tomorrow. If you want to trade, knock 3 times. Footsteps retreated. Silence returned in layers. Wind, a far engine, nothing else. I waited 40 minutes before I even looked. The outer door stayed shut. Through the access seam near the latch, I could just barely see a plastic bottle wedged against the threshold. When I finally opened enough to reach it, I expected a note. It was a half-liter water bottle, factory sealed, with a strip of blue tape around it and marker writing, Marin Leo Tess. No note, just names. I closed the door and sat on the floor holding that bottle for a long time. 3 names. Could be real, could be bait, could be a test by desperate people, decent people, dangerous people, all of the above. I kept replaying the voices and trying to decide what kind of fear they carried. I thought of my own voice in those first days, how I sounded to strangers at gas stations during storms or traffic accidents. You cannot always hear intent through stress. I did not sleep that night. I wrote a full page in the logbook instead. Not because I thought anyone would read it, but because the act of writing made me stop spiraling. Day 8. Contact at outer hatch previous evening. 3 persons claimed. Left sealed water bottle marked Marin Leo Tess. No forced entry attempt beyond handle latch inspection. Return promised before dark with knock signal ×3. Assessment unknown. Bunker concealment compromised. Concealment compromised. That phrase looked too official for what I felt, which was simple. I was no longer alone, and I no longer controlled whether this place stayed hidden. The next day, I prepared like I was 2 different men arguing. One version of me wanted to barricade everything, stay dark, and abandon the site at night through the drainage line before they came back. The other version wanted to make contact, trade, gather information, and maybe stop acting like a single occupant in a facility designed for a team. Both versions were right about something. I checked weapons first. I had my pistol, limited ammunition, and no fantasy about what a gun solves in a narrow concrete corridor. I found no firearms in the accessible lockers, only old cleaning kits and mounting brackets where weapons had once been stored. In one cabinet, I did find a canister of pepper spray foam and a collapsible baton, likely site security leftovers. I set them in the vestibule. Less lethal options matter when you are not trying to become the worst version of yourself. Then I planned the door. I would not open the outer hatch first. I would speak through it, confirm identities, ask them to step back, and use the knock signal only as acknowledgement. I moved the inner locker brace so I could reach the outer door quickly if needed, but still retreat behind the inner bend in the entry corridor. The angled corridor was a defensive feature, and for once I appreciated someone else's engineering. I also made a trade bundle. 2 ration pouches, purification tablets, a small roll of gauze, and 1 empty 1-gallon container from storage. Not generous, but not nothing. I could not promise water from the bunker without knowing who they were or how many more might be nearby. If they had a source and needed tablets, that was valuable. If they were testing me, the bundle showed I was not empty and not stupid. They arrived earlier than I expected. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. I stood in the vestibule and said, loud enough to carry, "Step back from the door, hands visible if I open." Silence. Then the older male voice. "We can do that." I heard shuffling, then the female voice. "We're back by the barrier, kids with us." I cracked the outer door 2 inches with the chain set properly this time and looked through the gap. 3 people, just like they said. A man, maybe mid-40s, with a sunburned face, work jacket, and the tired eyes of someone who had been making decisions all week. A woman around my age with a backpack and a pry bar hanging from a loop of webbing. And a girl, maybe 12 or 13, thin, dusty, clutching 2 empty water jugs. The man had a revolver holstered openly. The woman had what looked like a utility knife and maybe more I could not see. The girl had nothing in her hands but the jugs. They looked at me like people who had found a door in winter. "My name's Riley," I said. The man nodded once. "Marin Holt. This is my daughter Tess, Leo Navarro." He pointed to the woman, then himself, then the girl. So, Leo was the man, Marin the woman. I had guessed wrong from the bottle. Good reminder. "You military?" Leo asked. "No." "Site caretaker?" "No." That changed their faces. Not fear exactly, recalculation. Leo glanced at the door, the frame, and the scrub around it. "Then, how did you get in?" "Luck," I said, "and I'm not opening for a conversation." Marin spoke before Leo could push. "Fair. We're not asking to rush your place. We need water and information. We've been moving along the ditch system and service roads. There are groups sweeping houses east of here. Some are just taking food, some are taking everything." Tess said quietly, "We heard a generator yesterday." Leo gave her a look, not angry, just warning her about saying too much. I noticed because that is what parents do when the world gets dangerous. They teach silence faster than anything else. I slid the trade bundle through the gap first, then the empty gallon container. Purification tablets, food, basic medical. I can trade more later depending on what you know and what you've got. Leo crouched, checked the bundle, and looked up at me. "What do you want?" "Road conditions. Which areas are dead zones? Any organized response is still moving. If you saw anyone map this location." Marin answered like she had been keeping track. "Interstate 25 is blocked in sections north and south, multiple wreck clusters. Academy is chaos near commercial strips. Powers has crowds and checkpoints that don't hold. We saw National Guard trucks 2 days ago near a distribution point, but the line collapsed and then nobody was controlling it. Fort Carson traffic moved hard for a while, then less. Could be regrouping inside, could be pulled elsewhere, we don't know." "Any radio?" Leo lifted a handheld unit from his jacket. "Receiver mostly. Transmit iffy, too much chatter, no discipline. Some county channels still active in bursts, lots of people stepping on each other." "Anyone talk about this place?" They exchanged a look. Marin said, "No coordinates. But people talk about old government sites all over the county now. Utility shelters, maintenance tunnels, Missile bunkers. All kinds of nonsense, most of it rumor. Leo added, "One group is following rumors on purpose, looking for stockpiles. We stayed away." That mattered more than any road update. I looked at Tess. She had not taken her eyes off the water tank fittings just inside the gap. Smart kid. She was mapping what she could see. "You got a source?" I asked, nodding at the jugs. "Intermittent spigot at an equipment yard," Marin said. "Low pressure, not clean. We're boiling when we can. Fuel's the problem." I thought for a second too long, then made a choice I could not take back. "I can fill 1 gallon, not both. You come back tomorrow with batteries if you find any that fit this." I held up one of the radio battery packs through the gap so they could see the model and connector shape, and any current info on groups near this corridor. Leo's eyes narrowed, assessing whether I was rich or desperate. 1 gallon for battery maybe we can't find? 1 gallon for the attempt and the info, I said. "And because you left a sealed bottle instead of trying to pry my door all night." Marin almost smiled at that. That was my call. I closed the door, locked it, filled 1 jug from my reserve while hating every drop, then brought it back. When I passed it through, Tess whispered, "Thank you," with the kind of seriousness adults use when children stop being children too fast. After they left, the bunker felt different. Not safer, more real. Now the place existed in a network of human decisions. My hidden door had become a negotiation point. The question was no longer whether the bunker's purpose was shelter or control. The question was whether I would use its control to stay alive alone or build a small system with other people and accept all the risk that comes with that. For 3 more days, they came back. Not every day at the same time, and never in a pattern obvious enough to track. That told me Leo had sense. They brought batteries on day 10. Wrong type first, then a better match on day 11, after Leo scavenged from a municipal maintenance truck. They brought information consistently. Marin was a former emergency department registration supervisor, which meant she was not clinical staff but had spent years handling chaos, paperwork, and people under stress. She listened carefully and remembered details. Leo had run small excavation crews and knew utility easements, access roads, and how to read disturbed ground better than anyone I have met. Tess mostly listened, but when she spoke, she noticed things adults missed. Which houses showed smoke at dawn, which roads had dogs moving in packs, which parking lots had fresh tire marks versus abandoned rows. In return, I traded measured amounts of water, tablets, ration packs, and eventually one of the spare blankets. I did not open the door wider than necessary. I did not invite them in. Every conversation happened through steel and a controlled gap. That was control. It kept me alive. It also kept a kid standing outside in wind and dust while I sat behind concrete. On day 12, Leo came without Marin or Tess and pounded once. Hard, not the usual knock pattern. I opened on chain and saw immediately something was wrong. He was breathing hard, face gray under the dust, revolver gone. "Need help," he said. "Now." Marin twisted her leg bad in the ditch cut. "Can't move fast. 2 men tracked us from the yards. Tess is with her behind the old culvert half a mile east." Every alarm in my head went off. Classic lure, classic urgency split the defender. But Leo looked like a man who had run uphill on empty and was holding himself together by discipline alone. "Why come here?" I asked. "Because you have a place with a door," he said, and for the first time his voice cracked. "And because I think if they see us stop moving, they'll take the girl." There it was, shelter or control. I told him to step back and wait. I closed the door and stood in the vestibule with my hand on the inner latch, running the math. If I stayed, maybe I kept the bunker concealed a little longer and avoided a trap. If I went, I exposed the site by moving to and from it with someone watching. If I brought them in, I changed everything about water, noise, fuel, risk, trust. If I left a woman and a kid in a culvert because I wanted to preserve inventory, then whatever this bunker made me, I would have to live with it. I took the pepper spray, baton, pistol, a flashlight, a medical bag, 1 blanket, and a gallon of water. I shut down all non-essential lights, secured the inner rooms, and wrote in the logbook, leaving site with Leo to recover Marin and Tess. Concealment likely compromised if followed. Then I opened the door, stepped out into daylight for the first time in days, and locked the blast door behind me. The sky over the scrub and concrete looked too normal for the world we were in. Blue, dry, bright, the kind of Colorado afternoon that usually means people are headed for trails or hardware stores. Leo moved fast but low, cutting through brush lines and barrier shadows. He was good at it. I stayed a few yards back so we would not bunch up if someone took a shot, though I did not hear any gunfire and prayed that meant the men had peeled off. We found Marin and Tess, where he said, tucked in the shadow of a broken culvert section along a drainage channel. Marin's ankle was swelling fast, boot twisted at a bad angle. Not bone through skin, nothing graphic, but bad enough she could not put weight on it. Tess had a piece of rebar in both hands, and did not lower it until Leo said my name. "No time for pride," Marin said through clenched teeth when she saw me. "If you came to say no, say it quick." "I came to move you," I said. We improvised a support with a blanket and a length of conduit Leo found nearby, got Marin upright, and made the half-mile back in starts and stops while Tess watched rear trail like a veteran. Twice, we froze because of distant voices. Once, we dropped flat while 2 men crossed a higher service track, maybe 70 yards off, carrying packs and 1 long gun. They did not see us or pretended not to. Bringing them to the door felt like crossing a line drawn in concrete. I opened, ushered them through, shut and barred the hatch, and for the first time, the bunker held more than 1 life because of me. The immediate tasks drove out philosophy. Wash hands, check injury, elevate ankle, ice impossible, compression improvised, pain meds measured, water schedule revised, sleeping assignments, noise discipline, light discipline, rules about the locked doors and generator. I heard myself giving instructions and realized I sounded like the laminated checklist guys from the manuals, which would have been funny if I were not terrified. Marin's ankle was not perfect, but not catastrophic. A severe sprain, maybe fracture, impossible to confirm without imaging. She could not travel for at least several days. That answered the next question whether I wanted it answered or not. We were a team now, temporary or not. The bunker changed again with people inside. It got louder in human ways. A cough from the bunk room. Tess asking where to put empty pouches. Leo muttering at the generator as I showed him the bleed procedure. Marin reading label after label and organizing supplies into categories I had only carried in my head. It also got more efficient. Leo spotted a vent backdraft issue I had missed because 1 damper linkage was binding under load. Marin built a ration and water log in neat columns and made me admit my estimates were sloppy. Tess learned the radio battery routine in 1 afternoon and started noting incoming snippets by time and frequency because she had good ears and patience. The blinking alarm still flashed. But now it bothered all of us equally, which is a small comfort I had not expected. On the second night after they moved in, we heard voices at the outer door again. Different voices. Male, rougher, more confident. They did not ask if anyone was inside. They tested the handle, scraped around the latch, and one of them said, clear through the steel, "Tracks lead here. There's something in this hill." Leo and I stood in the vestibule on opposite sides of the inner bend, not speaking. Marin had Tess in the control room with lights cut. My hand was slick on the pepper spray canister, not the pistol. I did not want the first use of a firearm in that corridor unless there was no alternative. The men outside argued in low voices. One wanted to pry. Another said come back with tools. Then one laughed and slapped the door hard. Whoever's in there will be back. Their footsteps faded. Nobody moved for a long time. That was the night the bunker's purpose became clear to me. It was never just shelter. Shelter is a blanket, a roof, a locked room. This place was a system built to control variables. Air, water, power, access, noise, information, people. In normal times, that control served a mission. In the outbreak, the mission vanished, but the logic remained. If we used the system well, maybe 4 people could survive longer than 1. If we used it badly, the bunker would turn us against each other before anyone outside ever breached the door. So we made rules, real ones, together. No one opens the outer hatch alone. No generator runs without a second person aware and listening. Water use logged, no exceptions. Trade only through controlled gap and only when 2 adults agree. No one promises shelter to outsiders at the door in the moment. Every contact recorded. If forced entry signs increase, we prepare to displace before fuel or water failure traps us. Tess added one rule quietly from the bunk, and all of us accepted it. No lying inside, she said. If we're scared, just say scared. That might have been the most important one. I do not know how long we can keep a place like that. I am telling this from memory and notes because the days blurred after that into maintenance, watch rotations, cautious trades, and planning routes in case the door stopped being enough. We learned more about the radio. We caught fragmented county traffic, some organized evacuation attempts, some warnings, some plain desperation. We mapped quiet windows. We found a way to collect a little condensation, and every drop mattered. Leo eventually got the battery room open without wrecking the frame, and the reserve bank was in worse shape than I hoped, but not dead. Marin turned the galley shelf into a clinic corner and made me clean things properly. Tess started calling the blinking alarm the heartbeat, and somehow that made it less hostile. I still think about the first night I came in here alone, when I believed a steel door could solve the problem. It can't. A door buys time. Systems buy options. Rules buy stability. People make it worth any of that. And control, if you are not careful, starts to feel like safety even when it is just fear with better hardware. If you're hearing my voice in a room with lights and running water and a lock you trust, remember this for me. Hidden places are not magic. They are maintenance. They are rationing. They are decisions you have to repeat every day. And when voices show up outside, the hardest part is not deciding whether to let them in. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.